Sit down, sweetheart, before these people learn what happens when they mistake cruelty for courage. The words cut through the crystal ballroom so sharply that even the string quartet stopped playing. Every face turned toward Isabella Moretti, a 28-year-old plus-size banquet server standing beneath a chandelier worth more than her apartment building, one hand gripping a silver tray while red wine soaked the front of her black uniform. Seconds earlier, socialite Vanessa Crane had deliberately knocked the glass from Isabella's hand, then laughed loudly enough for 200 guests to hear. "Maybe they should hire people who can move between tables without taking up the whole aisle," Vanessa had said, earning nervous smiles from women in diamonds and men who knew better than to challenge her. Isabella felt heat crawl up her neck, but she refused to lower her eyes. She had spent years being treated as though her body entered a room before her kindness, intelligence, or name ever did. She had survived an ex-fiancé who called her embarrassing, a mother who measured affection in dress sizes, and 3 months of double shifts to pay her younger brother's medical bills. She would not cry for Vanessa Crane. Not here. Not in front of the most dangerous man in Chicago. Luca DeSantis sat at the center table in a charcoal suit, his dark gaze fixed on Isabella with the stillness of a loaded weapon. At 36, Luca was the feared head of the DeSantis crime family, a man who controlled ports, unions, and half the private security contracts in the city. Politicians avoided saying his name on open phone lines. Rival bosses lowered their voices when he entered a room. Wealth surrounded him, but warmth never did. Since his younger brother's betrayal 5 years earlier, Luca trusted contracts more than people, and silence more than promises. Yet tonight, as everyone watched Isabella stand alone in her stained uniform, something in his expression changed. Not softness. Not yet. Recognition. Vanessa tilted her head and smiled at Luca as if expecting approval. After all, she was the daughter of the senator whose alliance Luca was supposed to secure before midnight. "It was an accident," Vanessa said sweetly. "The poor girl lost her balance." Isabella placed the tray on a nearby table. "No, ma'am. You hit the glass." A shocked murmur spread through the ballroom. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Are you calling me a liar?" Isabella's hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I'm saying the truth doesn't become disrespectful just because someone powerful dislikes it." Luca's consigliere slowly turned toward him, waiting for an order. Instead, Luca rose. The room seemed to shrink around his 6'3" frame. He crossed the marble floor without hurry, every step measured, while Isabella forced herself not to retreat. He stopped close enough for her to catch the clean scent of cedar and rain on his coat. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, and somehow more frightening than a shout. "Isabella Moretti." "Say it louder." She swallowed. "Isabella Moretti." Luca looked over her shoulder at the guests. "Good. Now everyone knows the name they will use when they apologize." Vanessa laughed once, too sharply. "Luca, this is ridiculous. She is staff." His gaze shifted to Vanessa, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "And you are a guest in my house." Before Vanessa could answer, the event manager rushed forward, pale and sweating. "Mr. DeSantis, I'll remove Miss Moretti immediately." Isabella's stomach fell. She needed this job. Without it, her brother's next treatment would be impossible. But Luca did something no one expected. He reached for her wrist, not roughly, but with unmistakable authority, guided her around the table, and pulled her gently onto his lap. Gasps swept through the ballroom. Isabella froze, every muscle locked, her heart pounding against her ribs as Luca placed one steadying hand at her waist and draped his jacket over the wine stain, shielding her from every hungry stare. He leaned close, his breath warm near her ear, and whispered words meant only for her. "Do not move. The man who poisoned my glass is watching to see whether you warned me." Isabella's blood turned cold. She had noticed the waiter switch Luca's drink 10 minutes earlier, but she had said nothing because no one ever believed women like her. Now Luca's hand tightened slightly at her waist as his eyes tracked the room. Then Isabella saw the event manager reach inside his jacket, and she realized the humiliation had never been the real danger. It had been the distraction. Isabella felt the event manager's hand move beneath his jacket before anyone else noticed. "Luca," she whispered, keeping her face turned toward him as if they were sharing something intimate. The man near the service door is reaching for something. Luca did not look away from her. That frightened her more than if he had stood and shouted. His hand remained steady at her waist, but every guard in the ballroom seemed to react to an invisible signal. Two men shifted near the exits. Another stepped behind Vanessa Crane. The event manager froze when Luca finally lifted his eyes. "Take your hand out slowly, Martin," Luca said. The room went silent. Martin Bell, the man who had managed every DeSantis charity gala for 6 years, gave a nervous laugh. "Mr. DeSantis, I only have the seating list." "Then you will not mind showing it." Martin hesitated. Luca's voice dropped. "Now." Martin pulled out a folded card, but one of Luca's guards crossed the room and seized his wrist before he could move again. A tiny glass vial slipped from Martin's sleeve and struck the marble floor. Isabella heard Vanessa gasp behind them. Luca looked at the vial, then at the untouched drink beside his chair. "Seal the room," he ordered. Heavy doors closed at once. Guests began whispering, but Luca raised one finger and the whispers died. He turned back to Isabella. "Did you see him put that in my glass?" "Not exactly. I saw another waiter switch your drink and Martin watched him do it." "Which waiter?" Isabella scanned the faces lining the walls. Her heart pounded harder when she realized the young man was gone. He was wearing a white service jacket, tall, blonde, a scar near his left eyebrow. Luca's gaze sharpened. "There are no white service jackets at this event." Isabella stared at him. "Then he was pretending to work here." Luca rose, helping her to her feet without exposing the wine stain his jacket covered. He kept one hand beneath her elbow until she was steady. "You noticed a stranger in a room filled with 200 people. I notice people because most of them never notice me." The words escaped before she could stop them. Something unreadable passed through Luca's face. He turned toward the crowd. "No one leaves until my security team clears them." Senator Crane stepped forward, furious. "You cannot detain my daughter and half the city's donors because a server imagined she saw something." Luca's eyes hardened. "She identified a threat before men I pay millions to protect me did. Choose your next words carefully." Vanessa folded her arms. "She is trying to make herself important." Isabella's shame rose again, but Luca moved one step closer to her, placing his body between her and the room. She became important the moment she told the truth, while everyone else protected their invitations. Then he looked at his guards. "Check every camera. Find the man she described." Martin began struggling. "This is insane. She set me up." Isabella flinched when his gaze locked onto her. "You should have stayed invisible." Luca crossed the distance so quickly that Martin stopped breathing. He did not strike him. He simply leaned close enough to make the warning private. "Use her name." Martin's face went pale. "Isabella. With respect. Miss Moretti." Luca stepped back. "Better." The guards dragged Martin toward a side corridor while the crowd parted. Isabella watched them go, then remembered something. "Wait!" Everyone turned. She crouched beside the broken vial, careful not to touch it. A faint blue stain marked the glass. That color was on the blonde waiter's glove. Luca knelt beside her, expensive trousers touching the marble without hesitation. "What else?" "He bumped into me near the kitchen. He smelled like cloves, and he had a hotel keycard clipped beneath his sleeve." "Which hotel?" "The Marlowe. Room number started with 4. Luca's consigliere, Marco Santori, spoke into his earpiece. "Search every 4th-floor room registered in the last 48 hours." Isabella stood, suddenly aware that Luca was still beside her rather than towering over her. "You believed me quickly," she said. "No," he replied. "I verified you quickly. Belief is more expensive." "That sounds lonely." The words slipped out and Marco looked shocked that she was still alive. Luca stared at her for a long second. "It is efficient." "Those are not the same thing." Before he could answer, a guard hurried from the camera room carrying a tablet. "Boss, we found the disguised waiter on the West Hallway feed." The video showed the blonde man switching Luca's drink, then disappearing through the service exit. But when the guard zoomed in, Isabella saw something that made her grip Luca's sleeve. Around the man's wrist was a black cord tied with a silver wolf charm. Luca's expression changed for the first time that night. The cold control cracked, revealing something older and more dangerous. "You recognize it," Isabella said. Luca took the tablet. "It belonged to my brother." Marco stiffened. Your brother has been dead for 5 years. Luca looked toward the sealed ballroom doors. Then someone wants me to believe a ghost came back to kill me. At that moment, Isabella's phone vibrated inside her apron. She pulled it out and saw a photograph of her younger brother leaving the hospital that afternoon. Beneath it were 6 words. "Stay silent, or he disappears tonight." Luca read the message over her shoulder. His hand closed around the phone, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough to terrify every person near them. "No one threatens what is under my protection." Isabella turned toward him, shaken. "I am not under your protection." Luca met her eyes. "You are now." The threat against Isabella's brother changed the room more completely than the vial of poison had. Luca handed her phone to Marco, then turned toward the guards. "Find Daniel Moretti. Hospital exit, parking garage, every traffic camera between there and his apartment. Bring him here alive and unharmed." Isabella's breath caught. "You know his name?" "I had your background checked the moment you identified the waiter." Anger flashed through her fear. "You investigated me without asking. Someone tried to kill me and used your family to silence you." Luca stepped closer, lowering his voice so the guests could not hear. "I will apologize for the invasion after your brother is safe." She wanted to hate the certainty in his tone, but beneath it she heard something she had rarely heard from anyone. Urgency for someone she loved. Marco returned the phone. The message bounced through 3 encrypted servers. "We traced the image to a camera outside St. Catherine's Hospital." Isabella looked toward the sealed doors. "Daniel takes the number 9 bus home. He cannot walk far after treatment." "Then whoever sent this knows his schedule," Luca said. His gaze moved to Martin, who stood restrained near the service corridor. "Who gave you her brother's information?" Martin's jaw tightened. "I do not know what you are talking about." Luca did not raise his voice. "You have one chance to become useful. And if I do not, then you become evidence." Senator Crane pushed through the crowd. "This spectacle has gone far enough. Release my daughter and reopen the doors." Vanessa stood behind him, no longer smiling. Luca faced them. "Your alliance was supposed to be signed before midnight. It is cancelled." A wave of shock moved through the ballroom. The senator's face reddened. "Because of a waitress?" "Because someone poisoned my glass inside my home. Your daughter helped create the distraction, and you are more concerned about a contract than a missing man." Vanessa's eyes snapped toward Isabella. "This is her fault. She planned all of it to get close to you." Isabella felt the accusation strike a familiar wound. She had spent years watching beautiful, wealthy people decide that any attention she received must have been stolen. Before she could answer, Luca stepped beside her. Not in front of her this time, beside her. "Then explain how she knew about the fake waiter before my security team did." Vanessa's silence lasted half a second too long. Isabella noticed it. So did Luca. "You knew there was a fake waiter," Isabella said. Vanessa laughed nervously. "Of course not. You looked at the service door before Martin reached inside his jacket." The room tightened around them. Vanessa's father turned toward her. "Is that true?" "She is lying." Isabella forced herself to meet Vanessa's stare. "You also called him Martin before Luca said his name." Marco checked the ballroom recording on his tablet. His expression hardened. "She did." Luca's eyes became cold. "Search Vanessa." Senator Crane stepped forward, but 2 guards blocked him. "You will not touch my daughter. Then she can empty her purse herself." Vanessa clutched the jeweled bag against her side. Isabella saw fear replace arrogance. Luca held out his hand. "Give it to me." "No, that was not a request." Vanessa looked around for support, but the people who had laughed at Isabella now avoided her eyes. Slowly, she placed the purse in Luca's palm. Marco searched it and removed a hotel keycard marked Marlowe, room 417. Isabella's stomach dropped. It matched the clue she had seen beneath the fake waiter's sleeve. Vanessa shook her head violently. "I have never seen that before." Marco found a second item, a folded photograph of Luca's supposedly dead brother, dated 2 weeks earlier. On the back, 3 words were written in black ink. "Midnight, sign or die." Luca studied the photograph, and for one brief moment his power seemed unable to protect him from memory. Isabella saw grief beneath his control. She touched his sleeve. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "Is he alive?" she asked. "I buried an empty coffin," Luca said quietly. "There was never a body." Before anyone could speak, Marco's earpiece crackled. His face changed. We found Daniel's bus. It was abandoned 6 blocks from the hospital. Isabella's knees weakened. Luca caught her by the waist before she fell. "No," she whispered. "He cannot defend himself." Luca steadied her, his voice softer than anyone in the room had heard. "Look at me. I will bring him back." "You cannot promise that." "I do not make promises I cannot keep." Martin suddenly laughed from the corridor. "You are already too late." Luca turned. "Where is he?" Martin smiled at Isabella. Room 417 was never for the assassin. It was for her brother. A sharp sound came from Marco's tablet as a live video feed opened. Daniel sat tied to a chair in a dark hotel room, breathing hard but conscious. Behind him stood the blonde man with the silver wolf bracelet. He looked directly into the camera and spoke. "Bring Isabella Moretti to the Marlowe by midnight, Luca, or her brother dies." Isabella stared at the screen in horror, but the next words froze everyone in the ballroom. "And come alone, brother. We have unfinished business." At 11:14 p.m., Luca ordered the ballroom cleared one guest at a time, each person searched, photographed, and warned not to speak about what had happened. Vanessa Crane, her father, and Martin Bell remained under guard while Luca led Isabella through a private corridor into his study. The room was dark, except for the amber glow of a desk lamp and the city lights beyond the windows. Isabella still wore his jacket over her stained uniform, and Luca noticed she was gripping the fabric as though it were the only solid thing left in her world. "You are not going to the Marlowe," he said. "My brother is tied to a chair because someone wants me there. That is exactly why you are not going." Isabella stepped closer despite the fear in her eyes. "You cannot protect me by taking away my choices." Luca's jaw tightened. Most people obeyed before he finished speaking. Isabella looked exhausted, frightened, and heartbreakingly small beneath the weight of the night, yet she refused to bend. "Daniel is all the family I have," she continued. "If I stay here while he suffers, I will never forgive myself. And if you walk into that hotel, Alessandro will use you to destroy both of us." Isabella froze. "You said his name." Luca turned toward the rain, striking the glass. "Alessandro DeSantis, my younger brother. 5 years ago, he sold information to a rival family. The night I confronted him, my car exploded outside a warehouse. He vanished, and everyone assumed he died in the fire that followed." His hand moved unconsciously toward the scar beneath his ribs. Isabella stared at the motion. The warehouse was near Halsted Street. Luca turned slowly. "How do you know that?" She approached him, her eyes fixed on the faint edge of the scar visible above his shirt collar. "Because I found you behind a closed diner that night. You were bleeding, and you kept trying to stand." The cold control left Luca's face. For one suspended moment, he looked less like Chicago's most feared mafia boss, and more like a wounded man seeing a ghost. Isabella's voice softened. "I wrapped your side with my red scarf and called 911 from a payphone because my cell battery was dead. You told me to leave before the men searching for you found us." Luca remembered rain in his eyes, a woman's shaking hands pressing fabric against his wound, and one sentence he had carried for 5 years. "You said fear did not make me weak," he whispered. Isabella's breath caught. "It meant I still had something worth surviving for." Luca crossed the distance between them. His fingers rose toward her face, then stopped, giving her the choice he had nearly denied her moments earlier. When she did not pull away, he brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I searched for you. I never gave my name to the police. Why? Because the men who came to the hospital asked questions about the woman who helped you. I had Daniel to protect." Luca lowered his forehead near hers, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "You saved my life before either of us knew who the other was." The study door opened, and Marco entered carrying a laptop. "Boss, we found something in the security footage." The video showed Martin slipping the Marlowe key card and Alessandro's photograph into Vanessa's purse during the spilled wine distraction. Vanessa had known about the fake waiter, but she had not planted the evidence herself. Under questioning, she admitted Alessandro had blackmailed her with records proving Senator Crane accepted illegal campaign money. She had been ordered to humiliate Isabella and keep the room focused on her, but claimed she knew nothing about Daniel's kidnapping. Marco placed another file on the screen. Daniel Moretti worked part-time in the hospital billing office before his treatments began. 3 weeks ago, he copied records connected to a shell company buying counterfeit medication. Isabella remembered Daniel's strange behavior that morning. He had visited her before work, hugged her too tightly, and insisted on repairing a torn seam in her apron himself. Her hands flew to the lower hem. He put something here. Luca took a letter opener from the desk and carefully cut the stitches. A small black flash drive dropped into Isabella's palm. Marco connected it to the laptop. The files contained bank transfers, shipment schedules, photographs of Alessandro alive, and a list of people secretly working for him inside Luca's organization. Martin Bell's name appeared first. Senator Crane's appeared next. Then the final name loaded onto the screen. Marco Santori. Silence filled the study. Luca looked at the man who had stood beside him for 12 years. Marco stared at the screen, stunned. That signature is not mine. Before Luca could answer, every light in the mansion went dark. A gunshot cracked from the corridor. Luca pulled Isabella behind the desk and covered her with his body as guards shouted outside. Emergency lights flickered red. Marco reached for his weapon, but the study door burst open and smoke rolled across the floor. Luca turned for less than a second to stop the masked figure rushing toward them. When he looked back, Isabella was gone. On the carpet lay his jacket, the flash drive, and a phone playing a live video from room 417. Alessandro appeared beside Daniel, smiling into the camera as another masked man dragged Isabella into view. "You spent 5 years looking for the woman who saved you," Alessandro said. "Now you have 20 minutes to save her again." Luca stared at the video for 3 seconds, then reached across the desk and froze the image. That is not live. Marco crouched beside him. "How can you tell?" Luca pointed to the brass clock behind Alessandro. It read 10:52 p.m., and Isabella is still wearing my jacket in the recording. Both men looked at the charcoal coat lying on the carpet. Luca's expression hardened. The footage was prepared before the blackout. The woman in that room is not Isabella. Marco enlarged the image until the captive's face blurred beneath her dark hair. A padded uniform created Isabella's shape, but the woman's hands were too thin. Alessandro had staged the scene to make Luca abandon the mansion, while the real Isabella remained somewhere inside. A faint scraping sound came through the heating vent. Luca lowered himself beside it and heard 3 slow knocks, followed by 2 quick ones. Isabella had used the same pattern against his arm when they hid behind the desk. "She is below us," he said. Marco pulled up the mansion plans. "The old wine cellar connects to this room through a service shaft." Luca retrieved the flash drive and placed it in Marco's palm. "Send every file to the district attorney, 3 newspapers and my most loyal captains. Schedule the release for midnight." Marco stared at him. "You still trust me?" "Alessandro put your name on that list because he needed me to doubt the one man who could help me." Luca met his eyes. "Do not make me regret being right." At 11:43 p.m., Luca entered the cellar through a concealed staircase while 2 guards circled through the kitchen. Red emergency lights washed the stone walls. Isabella sat bound to a chair between rows of wine barrels, but her eyes were alert. A masked man stood behind her with one hand gripping her shoulder and the other holding a weapon. "Drop yours," he ordered. Luca placed his pistol on the floor. "Let her go." "Alessandro said you would trade anything for her." He was wrong. Hurt flashed across Isabella's face until Luca added, "I do not trade people. I take them back." The masked man reached for Isabella's hair, but she slammed her heel onto his foot and drove the chair backward into his knees. Luca crossed the cellar before the man recovered. He struck the weapon aside and his guards rushed in to restrain the attacker. Luca immediately knelt before Isabella and cut the ropes. Red marks circled her wrists. His hands paused over them, anger shaking beneath his control. "Did he hurt you?" "He tried to frighten me." "That was not my question." Isabella touched Luca's cheek. "I am still here." His eyes closed for half a second against her palm. Then Marco's voice came through his earpiece. "We traced the real transmission. Daniel is at the Marlowe, room 417. Alessandro's blocked the elevators and placed men on the 4th floor. 7 minutes until midnight." Luca stood and wrapped his coat around Isabella again. "You stay with my guards." She rose beside him. Daniel hid the evidence in my apron because he knew I would understand what to do. Alessandro needs me as much as he needs you. That makes you a target. It also makes me useful. Luca looked at the woman who had once saved him in the rain, who had faced humiliation without surrendering her dignity, and who had just fought her own captor while tied to a chair. He nodded once. You stay behind me. I stay beside you. At 11:55 p.m., they entered the Marlowe through the laundry dock. Marco disabled the cameras while Luca's men quietly secured the stairwells. Isabella led Luca through the fourth-floor service corridor, remembering the layout from years of banquet work at the hotel. Outside room 417, she noticed a thin wire stretched along the doorframe. "Do not touch it," she whispered. A bell cart stood nearby. She removed its small inspection mirror and angled it beneath the door. Daniel was still tied to the chair. Alessandro stood near the window, while Senator Crane held a phone displaying the unsigned alliance agreement. Martin Bell guarded the main entrance. "They expect us there," Isabella whispered, pointing toward the door. "The adjoining suite has a connecting bathroom." Luca's eyes showed approval. "You notice what everyone else ignores. I told you, it comes from being ignored." They entered room 419 and crossed silently into the shared bathroom. Luca's guards cut the lights at 11:58. In the darkness, Isabella crawled to Daniel and sliced his restraints with a broken piece of plastic from the keycard holder. Luca confronted Alessandro near the window. "It is over." Alessandro laughed. "At midnight, every file proving my crimes disappears, and Crane signs control of the ports to me. The files are already being released." For the first time, Alessandro's smile vanished. Senator Crane checked his phone and turned pale as messages flooded the screen. Martin raised his weapon, but Daniel kicked the chair into his legs. Isabella pulled her brother behind the marble counter as Luca's men entered. Alessandro seized Vanessa, who had been brought from the mansion by a corrupt guard, and held her near the window. "Sign the agreement," he told her father, "or she falls." Senator Crane's hands shook. Isabella stepped from cover holding the flash drive. "You want the evidence? Take it and let her go." Luca turned sharply. "Isabella, no." Alessandro's eyes fixed on the drive. "Bring it to me." She walked forward, one measured step at a time. When she was close enough, she threw the drive toward the open balcony. Alessandro released Vanessa and lunged for it. Luca pulled Isabella back as Marco tackled Alessandro before he reached the railing. The clock struck midnight. Police sirens rose outside, and every phone in the room began displaying the released evidence. But Martin, bleeding and desperate, lifted a hidden pistol from beneath his jacket. Luca saw it too late. A shot cracked across the suite. Luca staggered, one hand pressing his side, and Isabella stepped directly between him and the second bullet. Alessandro smiled from the floor and whispered, "Now choose, brother. Save your empire, or save her." Isabella did not move when Martin raised the pistol again. She stood in front of Luca with her arms spread, her body shielding the man everyone else believed untouchable. "Move," Martin ordered. Her knees trembled, but her voice remained steady. "No." Behind her, Luca pressed one hand against the wound along his side. The first bullet had grazed him, tearing through his jacket without striking anything vital, but Isabella did not know that yet. All she knew was that the cold Mafia Boss who had protected her dignity in a ballroom was now bleeding behind her, and she refused to let anyone decide that his life mattered more than hers, or that hers mattered less than his. Martin's finger tightened on the trigger. Before he could fire, Daniel pushed the overturned chair across the floor. It struck Martin's ankle, throwing off his aim, and Marco tackled him against the wall. Luca's guards secured the weapon, while police flooded the suite from the hallway. Alessandro struggled beneath two officers, shouting that the DeSantis empire belonged to him. Luca stepped around Isabella, pale but upright. "There is no empire left for you to steal," he said. "The ports, the shell companies, the counterfeit shipments, every payment and every name are now in the hands of federal investigators." Senator Crane stared at the evidence spreading across his phone screen. Vanessa stood beside him, shaken and silent, finally understanding that her father's hunger for influence had nearly cost her life. Alessandro looked toward Isabella with pure hatred. All of this because of her? Luca's expression became colder than the rain against the windows. No, all of this ended because you underestimated her. He looked at the officers. Take him. As Alessandro and Martin were led away, Isabella turned to Luca and saw blood staining his shirt. Her face lost its colour. You are hurt. It is a graze. You do not know that. I have survived worse. Her eyes filled with tears. Stop acting as though surviving means you are not allowed to need anyone. The room became quiet. Luca had commanded men, judges, unions, and politicians, but no one had ever spoken to him that way and remained standing so close. His gaze softened. Then stay. One word, spoken without power or threat, broke through the last of Isabella's defences. The hotel medic examined Luca and confirmed the bullet had only cut across his side. While the officers collected evidence, he sat in a chair near the window. Isabella remained beside him until the shaking in her hands stopped. When Vanessa approached, every guard watched her carefully. She looked at Isabella's stained uniform and then lowered her eyes. I was cruel to you because I thought humiliating you would make me look powerful. Isabella said nothing. Vanessa swallowed. I was wrong. I am sorry, Miss Moretti. Isabella did not rush to forgive her. An apology matters only when your behaviour changes. Vanessa nodded, accepting the answer. Luca watched Isabella choose dignity without revenge, and something inside him finally surrendered. He reached for her hand and gently pulled her onto his lap, just as he had in the ballroom, but this time there was no performance, no hidden assassin, and no room full of strangers waiting to laugh. Isabella rested one hand against his shoulder, uncertain of what he intended to say. Luca leaned close and whispered the words no one in that room expected from Chicago's most feared man. You never needed to become smaller to deserve a place beside me. Isabella's breath caught. Luca, you hardly know me. I know you tell the truth when lying would be safer. I know you protect people even when no one protects you. I know you saved my life twice and asked for nothing. His thumb brushed the red marks around her wrist, and I know I do not want another day in which the world makes you feel invisible. She searched his face. I will not belong to you like property. Good, he held her gaze. Stand beside me by choice, or not at all. For the first time that night, Isabella smiled. Then ask me properly when you are not bleeding. 6 months later, Isabella entered the restored DeSantis Foundation building in a deep blue dress that celebrated every curve she had once been taught to hide. She now directed a program providing medical assistance and legal protection to working families threatened by organized corruption. Daniel's treatments were successful, and he joined the foundation as a financial investigator. Luca left the criminal operations that had defined his family and rebuilt his power through legitimate security and shipping businesses, cooperating with authorities to dismantle Alessandro's remaining network. He was still feared by dangerous men, but the people closest to him discovered something extraordinary. Around Isabella, his voice softened. He remembered how she took her coffee. He opened doors without treating her as fragile. He listened when she disagreed. On the Foundation's opening night, Luca stood before the same wealthy guests who had watched her humiliation. He took Isabella's hand and introduced her by name, not as someone he had rescued, but as the woman whose courage saved lives and changed his own. Later, beneath warm lights on the terrace, he knelt and asked her to build a future with him. Isabella looked at the man who had once trusted no one and realized she no longer saw herself through the eyes of those who rejected her. She saw loyalty, intelligence, courage, beauty, and a woman worthy of being chosen without changing a single part of herself. She said yes. Their story began with a spilled glass, a whispered warning, and a room that judged her by her body. It ended with justice, healing, and 2 wounded people creating the home neither believed they would ever find. Do you think Isabella's courage saved Luca more deeply than his power protected her? Share your answer in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more emotional Mafia Boss stories where the woman everyone overlooks becomes the one no one can replace.